I thought I knew what exhaustion felt like. I'd pulled all-nighters in college, worked double shifts as a waitress to pay tuition, gone days on minimal sleep during finals week. But nothing prepared me for the bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion of working 3 jobs while watching someone you love fight cancer. My name is Rachel, and this is the story of how I worked myself into the ground for a man whose family could have helped us the entire time, and chose not to. It started 4 years ago. I was 31, working as an administrative assistant at a law firm in Minneapolis. The pay was decent, the benefits were good, and I'd finally started to feel like my life was stable. My husband, Connor, was a project manager at a marketing agency. We had a small 2-bedroom apartment in Uptown, a car that was paid off, and a shared dream of maybe buying a house in a few years. We'd been married for 3 years. The relationship wasn't perfect, whose is? But it was comfortable. We had our routines. Friday night dinners at the Thai place on Hennepin Avenue, lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and the New York Times crossword, occasional arguments about whose turn it was to do laundry. Normal married life. Then Connor started getting headaches. Bad ones that would leave him pale and nauseous, gripping the bathroom counter while he waited for the pain medication to kick in. At first, we thought it was stress. His job had been demanding lately, long hours and difficult clients. But the headaches got worse. Then came the vision problems, blurriness, spots of darkness that wouldn't go away. His doctor ordered an MRI. I remember sitting in the waiting room while Connor was in the machine, scrolling through my phone without really seeing anything, trying not to think about what they might find. They found a tumor. A glioblastoma, the doctor said. Aggressive. Grade 4. The words came at me like physical blows. Surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, months of treatment. No guarantees. Connor was 33 years old. The surgery happened 2 weeks later. They removed most of the tumor but not all of it. They couldn't, not without risking serious brain damage. Then came the radiation, 5 days a week for 6 weeks. Then chemotherapy. The treatment made him so sick he could barely eat. He lost 30 pounds in 2 months. His hair fell out in clumps. Some days he was so weak he couldn't walk from the bedroom to the bathroom without help. He had to stop working. The short-term disability payments covered about 60% of his salary, which wasn't enough. Not even close. Because even with insurance, the medical bills were staggering. The copays, the deductibles, the medications that cost hundreds of dollars per dose. The special supplements his oncologist recommended that insurance didn't cover. The parking fees at the hospital that added up to hundreds of dollars a month. I picked up a second job within a month of his diagnosis. Waitressing at a chain restaurant, working dinner shifts 4 nights a week after my regular job ended at 5. I'd leave the law firm, drive straight to the restaurant, work until 11, come home and help Connor with whatever he needed, sleep for 5 or 6 hours, and do it again. It wasn't enough. The bills kept coming. We maxed out one credit card, then another. We borrowed from my parents, $5,000 they really couldn't afford to lend us. We set up a GoFundMe that raised about $3,000 from friends and acquaintances and strangers who were moved by our story. I picked up a third job. Freelance data entry work I could do late at night after Connor fell asleep, sitting at our kitchen table at 1 in the morning, typing numbers into spreadsheets while my eyes burned with fatigue. I was working about 80 hours a week. Maybe more. The days blurred together. Wake up at 6, help Connor with his morning medications and breakfast, get to the law firm by 8, work until 5, drive to the restaurant, work until 11, come home, do data entry until 2 or 3 in the morning, sleep, repeat. On the weekends, I took Connor to his appointments, waited with him during his chemotherapy infusions, 6 hours at a time in a chair that was trying to be comfortable but wasn't, watching the poison drip into his veins and hoping it was killing the cancer faster than it was killing him. I lost 15 pounds because I kept forgetting to eat. I developed a tremor in my hands from too much coffee and too little sleep. I started getting my own headaches, tension headaches that wrapped around my skull like a vice. But I kept going. Because what else was I supposed to do? This was my husband. This was what marriage meant. In sickness and in health. For better or worse. Connor's family lived in Edina, one of the wealthy suburbs. His parents, Richard and Patricia, lived in a house that was worth at least $1 million, maybe more. His older brother, Mark, was a cardiologist. His younger sister, Julia, had married a commercial real estate developer. They visited sometimes. Patricia would bring casseroles I didn't have time to heat up. Richard would sit with Connor and talk about sports or politics, carefully avoiding any mention of money or the future. Mark would check Connor's medications and nod approvingly. Julia would cry and hug me and tell me I was so strong. But they didn't offer to help. Not financially. Not in any meaningful way. I told myself they probably assumed we were managing. That we'd ask if we really needed help. That they were respecting our independence by not offering. Connor never asked them for money. When I suggested it, gently, carefully, he'd get defensive. They already helped us with the wedding, he'd say. I don't want to be that person who's always asking for handouts. This isn't a handout. This is a medical crisis. They have their own expenses. Mark has 3 kids. Julia just bought a new house. I can't ask them to bail us out. So I didn't push. I just kept working. 15 months after Connor's diagnosis, I collapsed at the restaurant. I was carrying a tray of drinks, 4 waters, 2 sodas, and an iced tea, and suddenly my vision went gray at the edges. My knees buckled. I remember the sound of glasses shattering, ice scattering across the floor, someone shouting my name. Then nothing. I woke up in an ER. A different hospital than the one where Connor got his treatment. One of my co-workers had called an ambulance. The doctor told me I'd fainted from exhaustion and dehydration. My blood pressure was dangerously low. I was malnourished. I needed rest, proper meals, and to seriously reconsider my work schedule. How many hours a week are you working? She asked. I don't know. A lot. Give me a number. 80? Maybe 90. She looked at me like I'd just confessed to something criminal. That's not sustainable. You're going to seriously hurt yourself. My husband has cancer. I don't have a choice. Everyone has a choice. But I didn't. Not really. Because the bills kept coming, and someone had to pay them, and Connor couldn't work, and his family wouldn't help, and what was I supposed to do? Let the hospital bills go to collections? Stop paying for his medications? Give up? They kept me overnight for observation. I called Connor to tell him what happened. He sounded worried but not surprised. Maybe you should quit one of the jobs, he said. With what money? I asked. I was too tired to be gentle about it. I don't know. Maybe we could ask my parents. You said you didn't want to ask them. I know. But this is getting dangerous. You're in the hospital, Rachel. So are you. 4 times a week. He was quiet for a moment. That's different. How is it different? Because I can't help being sick. You're choosing to work yourself to death. I didn't have the energy to argue. I just told him I'd be home in the morning and ended the call. A nurse came in around midnight to check my vitals. She was older, maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes and the sort of calm competence that made you feel like everything would be okay even when it obviously wasn't. Your husband, she said as she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around my arm. The one with cancer. Is he getting good care? The best we can afford. And you're working 3 jobs to pay for it. Yes. She nodded slowly, watching the numbers on the monitor. Can I ask you something? Sure. Does he appreciate it? The question caught me off guard. What? Does your husband appreciate what you're doing for him? Does he see you? Does he thank you? I thought about it. Connor thanked me sometimes. When I brought him his medications, when I drove him to appointments, when I made him soup on the days he could stomach food. He'd say thanks, babe, in the same tone he'd used when we were dating, and I'd pick up his dry cleaning. But did he see me? Did he see the exhaustion, the weight loss, the tremor in my hands? Did he notice that I'd stopped buying new clothes because we couldn't afford them? That I cut my own hair in the bathroom mirror? That I'd given up everything that wasn't work or taking care of him? He's grateful, I said finally. He's just dealing with a lot right now. The nurse finished taking my blood pressure and made a note on her chart. Okay, she said. Her tone suggested she didn't believe me but wasn't going to push. Get some rest. After she left, I lay in the dark hospital room and stared at the ceiling. I thought about Connor, about our marriage, about the life we'd built together. I thought about the version of us that had existed before the diagnosis, the couple who argued about whose turn it was to do laundry, who split the check at restaurants, who made plans for a future that seemed guaranteed. That couple didn't exist anymore. I wasn't sure what we'd become instead. I went home the next morning. Connor was on the couch, pale and thin, watching something on TV with the sound turned low. He looked up when I walked in. Hey, you okay? Yeah, just tired. The doctor said you need to rest. I will. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because 3 days later, another hospital bill arrived. $18,000. And 2 days after that, the credit card company called to say we'd exceeded our limit and could we make a payment? I went back to work. All 3 jobs. Because what else was I going to do? 2 months later, Connor's brother Mark came by the apartment. It was a Saturday afternoon. Connor was sleeping, knocked out by the new pain medication his doctor had prescribed. I was at the kitchen table, sorting through bills and trying to figure out which ones I could pay and which ones I'd have to let slide. Mark knocked, let himself in with the spare key Connor had given him, and found me surrounded by papers and calculator tape. Hey, Rachel, he said. How's it going? I looked up. He was wearing expensive casual clothes, dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, leather loafers that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. It's going, I said. He sat down across from me without asking, glancing at the bills spread across the table. That's a lot of paperwork. Medical bills. And credit card statements. And the regular bills. You know, the fun stuff. He nodded slowly. Connor mentioned you've been working a lot. 3 jobs. That's intense. I didn't respond. I just went back to sorting papers. Listen, Mark said, and something in his tone made me stop and look at him. I wanted to talk to you about something. It's kind of sensitive. Okay. My parents have been talking, and we're all a little concerned about how hard you're working. We think maybe you're taking on too much. We're worried about your health. I stared at him. My health. Yeah. Connor told us about the hospital thing. The fainting. That's serious, Rachel. So is paying for your brother's cancer treatment. I know. But there's got to be a better way to manage this. Maybe you could talk to a financial counselor or look into assistance programs or... We've done all that, I interrupted. We've applied for every assistance program that exists. We've talked to financial counselors. We've done everything we're supposed to do. And it's still not enough. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Right. Of course. I just mean, maybe you don't have to carry all of this alone. I'm not alone. I'm married. I know, but Connor can't work right now, so naturally the burden falls on you, and we just want to make sure you're not burning yourself out. I looked at him for a long moment, at his expensive sweater and his well-rested face and his obvious discomfort with this conversation. And I thought about asking, about saying, if you're so concerned, why don't you help us? You're a doctor. You make good money. Your parents have $1 million house. Why am I working 80 hours a week while your family watches from the sidelines? But I didn't say it. Because Connor didn't want me to ask. Because it felt like begging. Because I was too tired to have that fight. I appreciate your concern, I said instead. I'll be fine. Mark nodded, relieved. Okay. Good. That's good. We just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself. After he left, I sat at the table for a long time, staring at the bills without really seeing them. Something about that conversation had shifted something inside me. The way he talked about our situation, like it was a problem I was managing poorly, like I was choosing to work myself to death out of some kind of stubbornness or martyr complex. Like his family had no responsibility to help. I thought about that for weeks, picked at it like a loose thread. And the more I thought about it, the more questions I had. Connor's family had money. Significant money. But they never offered to help. Not once. Not even when Connor's treatment got more aggressive, when the bills got bigger, when it became obvious we were drowning. Why? I didn't want to be paranoid. I didn't want to be the kind of person who kept score or expected handouts. But something didn't feel right. For months later, I found out why. I was doing laundry, emptying Connor's pockets before throwing his jeans in the wash, when I found a piece of paper. It was folded in half, slightly crumpled. A receipt, I thought at first. But when I unfolded it, I saw it was a bank statement. Not our bank. A different one. An account in Connor's name that I'd never seen before. The balance was over $300,000. I stood in our tiny laundry closet, holding that piece of paper, my hands shaking. $300,000. While I was working 3 jobs. While we were drowning in debt. While I was collapsing from exhaustion. I walked into the living room. Connor was on the couch, watching TV. He looked up when I walked in. "Hey, babe. Almost done with laundry." I held up the statement. "What is this?" He glanced at it, and I saw the exact moment he realized what I was holding. His face went pale. "Where did you get that?" "Your pocket." "What is this, Connor?" He sat up straighter, wincing at the movement. "It's complicated." "Uncomplicate it." He was quiet for a long moment. "It's a trust fund. From my grandparents. It was set up when I was a kid." "A trust fund?" "Yeah. With $300,000 in it." "About that, yeah." I felt like I was standing outside my own body, watching this conversation happen to someone else. "And you didn't think to mention this?" While I was working 80 hours a week. While we were maxing out credit cards and borrowing money from my parents. It's not that simple. Yes, it is. It's exactly that simple. You have money. We need money. Why aren't we using it? "Because it's for my future," he said. His voice had gone defensive, almost petulant. "It's my inheritance. It's supposed to be for a house, for our kids' education, for retirement. Not for medical bills." I stared at him. "You're joking." "I'm not. That money has to last. If I use it all for treatment, what are we going to have later?" "Later? Connor, there might not be a later. You have stage 4 cancer." He flinched. "Don't say that." "It's true. The doctors have been honest about the survival rates. You know this. So I should just give up? Blow through my entire inheritance and have nothing left?" "I'm not saying give up. I'm saying use the resources we have instead of letting me work myself to death. Nobody's forcing you to work 3 jobs. You chose that." The words hit me like a slap. I stood there, holding his bank statement, looking at the man I'd married, and I didn't recognize him. "I chose it," I repeated slowly. "I chose to work 3 jobs because you told me we couldn't afford your treatment. You told me we had no options. You let me believe we were drowning when you had a life raft the entire time. It's my money. We're married. There is no my money and your money when one of us has cancer and the other is collapsing from exhaustion." He looked away. "My family says the same thing. That I shouldn't touch the trust fund. That we'll figure it out. That you're strong enough to handle this. Your family knows." "Of course they know. They are the ones who set it up." And suddenly everything made sense. The lack of financial help. Patricia's casseroles and Julia's tears and Mark's concern about my health. They weren't helping because they knew Connor had money. They were watching me work myself into the ground because they decided his inheritance was more important than my well-being. "Get out," I said quietly. Connor looked up, startled. "What?" "Get out. Go stay with your parents. I can't look at you right now. Rachel, come on. Go. Now." He stared at me for a long moment, then slowly got up from the couch. He was moving carefully, still weak from the latest round of chemo. Part of me wanted to help him. That instinct was so ingrained I almost moved toward him automatically. But I didn't. I just stood there, holding his bank statement, while he gathered a few things and called his brother to come pick him up. Mark arrived 20 minutes later. He took one look at me and must have known something had shifted. He didn't ask questions. He just helped Connor to the car and drove away. After they left, I sat on the couch in the empty apartment and cried for the first time in months. Not gentle tears, but huge, gasping sobs that felt like they were tearing something loose inside my chest. I'd given everything. Everything. And it hadn't mattered. Because Connor had the resources to help us the entire time, and he'd chosen to hoard them while I destroyed myself. The next morning, I called in sick to all 3 jobs. I couldn't go. I couldn't pretend everything was fine. I just stayed in the apartment, moving through the rooms like a ghost, trying to figure out what I was supposed to do next. Connor called twice. I didn't answer. His mother called. I didn't answer. Mark texted, "We need to talk about this." I deleted it. On the 3rd day, I went to see a divorce lawyer. Her name was Jennifer, and she had kind eyes and 20 years of experience and a reputation for being fierce but fair. "Tell me what's going on," she said. I told her everything. The cancer, the 3 jobs, the trust fund, the family that had watched me drown without throwing a rope. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Minnesota is a no-fault divorce state. The trust fund, if it was established before you got married and kept completely separate, might be considered separate property. But any money he withdrew during the marriage, any interest it earned, that could be considered marital property." "I don't want his money," I said. "I just want out." "Are you sure? Because you're entitled to." "I'm sure. I don't want anything from him or his family. I just want my life back." She nodded. "Okay. Let's start the paperwork." I moved out a week later. Found a studio apartment in northeast Minneapolis, one of those old buildings with thin walls and radiator heat. It was small and slightly shabby, but the rent was cheap, and it was mine. I quit 2 of my 3 jobs. Kept the one at the law firm, the one with benefits and regular hours. Started sleeping 8 hours a night. Started eating 3 meals a day. The tremor in my hands went away. The headaches faded. Connor tried to talk to me a few times. Called, texted, showed up at my new apartment once. I didn't engage. I just told him to talk to my lawyer and close the door. His family tried too. Patricia left a voicemail saying she understood I was upset but that I was being unreasonable. Mark sent an email explaining that the trust fund was Connor's security and that I should be more understanding of his desire to protect it. Julia texted that she hoped I'd calm down and see reason. I blocked all of them. The divorce took 4 months. Connor didn't contest it. At the final hearing, he looked thinner than ever, pale and tired in a suit that no longer fit him properly. I looked at him across the courtroom and felt nothing. Not anger, not love, not even pity. Just emptiness. When it was over, I walked out of the courthouse into a bright October afternoon. The air was crisp, the leaves were turning, and I had nowhere I needed to be. I got in my car, drove to a coffee shop I'd never been to before, and ordered something expensive and ridiculous, a latte with oat milk and lavender and honey. I sat by the window and drank it slowly, watching people walk by, and I thought, this is what my life could be. Quiet. Mine. Simple. I didn't know if Connor's treatment was working. I didn't know if he'd use the trust fund now that I wasn't there to subsidize his choices. I didn't know what his family thought about the divorce or if they blamed me or if they'd finally see what they'd done. I didn't know. And I realized I didn't need to know. That night, I went back to my studio apartment, ordered takeout, and ate it sitting on my second-hand couch. I watched a movie I'd been wanting to see for months but had never had time for. I went to bed at 10 and slept until 7 without setting an alarm. And when I woke up, I felt something I hadn't felt in almost 2 years, rested. But then something strange happened. I opened my eyes on a Sunday morning, and the light coming through the window was wrong. Too bright. Too golden. The wrong angle. I sat up, disoriented, and looked around. This wasn't my studio apartment in northeast Minneapolis. This was our old apartment. The 2-bedroom in Uptown. The one I'd left almost 3 months ago. I looked down at my hands. The tremor was gone, but they looked different. Less thin. The calluses I'd developed from waitressing weren't there. My phone was on the nightstand. I grabbed it, my heart pounding. The date on the screen said March 15th. 3 years ago. 1 week before Connor's diagnosis. I sat there, holding my phone, trying to make sense of what was happening. This wasn't possible. I'd lived through the divorce. I'd moved into my studio apartment. I'd rebuilt my life. This couldn't be real. But it felt real. The apartment felt real. My body felt real. Everything felt exactly like it had 3 years ago. I got out of bed slowly, like I was walking through a dream. Went to the bathroom. My face in the mirror looked younger, not dramatically, but there were lines missing. The exhaustion was gone from my eyes. I looked like I'd been sleeping properly, eating properly. I heard Connor moving around in the kitchen. The sound of the coffee maker, cabinet doors opening and closing. He called out, "You want coffee?" His voice. Strong, healthy, not the thin, strained voice of someone fighting cancer. I walked to the kitchen. Connor was standing by the counter, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, sleepyhead." He looked healthy. No weight loss, no pale skin, no weakness. He looked like the man I'd married. "Hi," I managed. "You okay? You look weird." "I'm fine. Just, still waking up." He handed me a mug. "We're still on for brunch with my parents, right? Mom's been talking about it all week." Brunch with his parents. I remembered this. 3 years ago, we'd had brunch with Richard and Patricia at their country club. I'd worn a dress I'd bought on sale. Connor had talked about a project at work. It had been boring but pleasant. That had been a week before the headache started. "Yeah," I said. "We're still on." Connor kissed my forehead and went to take a shower. I stood in the kitchen, holding my coffee, trying to understand what was happening. This couldn't be real. I couldn't have gone back in time. That didn't happen. That wasn't how the world worked. But if this wasn't real, it was the most vivid dream I'd ever had. I could feel the warmth of the coffee mug. I could smell the shampoo Connor had just used. I could hear traffic outside our window. I sat down at the kitchen table and tried to think logically. Either I'd lost my mind, or somehow, impossibly, I'd been given a chance to live this part of my life again. If it was the latter, if this was real, what was I supposed to do? Leave Connor right now? Before the diagnosis, before the trust fund revelation, before everything fell apart? But what reason would I give? We were happy. Or at least, we'd been happy enough. Tell him about the tumor before he started getting symptoms? But how would I know? How could I possibly explain knowing about something that hadn't been diagnosed yet? I spent that entire Sunday in a fog, going through the motions. Brunch with Connor's parents. Small talk about their golf game and Patricia's book club. Richard complaining about taxes. Julia showing us photos of her new kitchen renovation. I watched them carefully, these people who would later stand by while I worked myself into the ground. They looked so normal. So pleasant. Patricia complimented my dress. Richard asked about my job at the law firm. Mark told a story about one of his patients that made everyone laugh. They didn't know what they were going to do to me. Or maybe they did, and they just didn't care yet because the crisis hadn't arrived. That night, Connor and I went home and watched TV on the couch. He fell asleep with his head on my shoulder. I looked down at him, healthy, peaceful, unaware of what was coming, and I felt a complicated knot of emotions I couldn't untangle. I still loved him. I thought I did, anyway. But I also knew what he was going to do. I knew about the trust fund. I knew about the choices he'd make. Could I prevent it? Could I change the outcome? Did I want to? I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Connor breathe beside me, trying to decide what I was going to do. The next morning, I woke up to my alarm. Still in our apartment. Still 3 years in the past. Which meant this wasn't a dream. Or if it was a persistent one. I got up, got dressed, went to work at the law firm. Everything was exactly as I remembered it. My desk, my co-workers, my boss Martin asking if I'd finished the filing he'd requested last week. I did my work on autopilot, my mind spinning. If this was real, if I really had somehow come back to this point in my life, I had a choice to make. I could try to save the marriage. I could warn Connor about the tumor, push him to get checked early, maybe improve his treatment outcomes. I could try to have the conversation about the trust fund before the crisis hit. Or I could save myself. That week, I paid attention to Connor in a way I hadn't the first time around. I watched how he talked about his family, how he spoke about money, how he reacted when I mentioned financial planning or future goals. He was dismissive of my concerns. Not in an aggressive way, just in a casual, everything will be fine way that I'd found charming the first time around. Now it felt different. Like he didn't take me seriously. Like he didn't think my worries mattered. On Thursday, exactly 1 week into this impossible second chance, Connor came home from work complaining of a headache. Probably just stress, he said, taking 2 ibuprofen from the bathroom cabinet. Big presentation tomorrow. I watched him swallow the pills, and I knew. This was it. This was the beginning. Maybe you should see a doctor, I said. For a headache. It could be something more serious. He laughed. It's a headache, Rachel. Not everything is a medical emergency. But I knew it was. I knew that in 3 weeks, after the headaches got worse and the vision problems started, he'd finally see a doctor. And they'd find the tumor. And everything would spiral from there. Unless I changed it. I think you should get checked anyway, I said. Just to be safe. You're being paranoid. Maybe. But humor me. He sighed but agreed to make an appointment. If it'll make you feel better. The appointment was set for the following Tuesday. In the original timeline, Connor hadn't seen a doctor for 3 more weeks. This time, we'd catch it earlier. Would that make a difference? Would earlier treatment mean better outcomes? I didn't know. But it felt like doing something, which was better than doing nothing. That weekend, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Some crucial piece of information. I kept thinking about the trust fund, about Connor's family, about all the ways the first timeline had gone wrong. On Sunday afternoon, while Connor was napping, I did something I hadn't done the first time around. I went through his papers. Not snooping, exactly. More like investigating. I looked through the filing cabinet where we kept important documents. Tax returns, insurance policies, bank statements. And there, in a folder labeled Family Documents, I found it. A copy of the trust fund paperwork. Established by Connor's grandparents when he was 6 years old. Currently valued at just over $320,000. Managed by his father as trustee. I sat on the floor of our bedroom, reading through the trust documents, and I realized something I'd missed the first time around. The trust included a clause about medical expenses. In the event of serious illness, funds could be withdrawn for treatment without penalty. It was right there in the paperwork. Connor's family knew about this clause. They'd known the entire time. They'd let me work 3 jobs when the money had been available all along. Not just available, specifically designated for exactly this situation. I put the documents back carefully, exactly as I'd found them. My hands were shaking, but not from exhaustion this time. From anger. Connor's appointment was on Tuesday. I took the morning off work to go with him. The doctor listened to his symptoms, did a basic neurological exam, and ordered an MRI. Probably nothing, the doctor said. But better safe than sorry. The MRI was scheduled for Thursday. I went with him, sat in the waiting room, watched him disappear into the machine. Just like the first time. This time, when the doctor called with the results, I was ready. Mr. Hayes, I'm afraid we found something concerning on your scan. A mass in your left frontal lobe. We're going to need to refer you to a neurosurgeon for a consultation. Connor went pale. I watched him process the information, saw the fear creep into his eyes. I wanted to feel sympathetic. I wanted to comfort him. But I also wanted to see what he'd do. How he'd react. What choices he'd make. The neurosurgeon confirmed it was a tumor. Glioblastoma, grade 4. The same diagnosis as before. Surgery was scheduled for 2 weeks out. That night, Connor's family came over. All of them, Richard, Patricia, Mark, Julia. They gathered in our living room like a council, discussing treatment options, asking questions, being supportive. Patricia cried. Mark took notes. Richard asked about insurance coverage. Julia held Connor's hand. And I watched them, these people who knew about the trust fund, and I waited to see if anyone would mention it. Nobody did. Finally, when there was a lull in the conversation, I spoke up. Connor has a trust fund, I said. From his grandparents. There's over $300,000 in it. Everyone went quiet. Connor looked at me, startled. Rachel. I found the paperwork, I continued. There's a clause about medical expenses. The money can be used for treatment without penalty. You all know this. Patricia's face went carefully blank. Richard shifted in his seat. Mark and Julia exchanged glances. That money is for Connor's future, Patricia finally said. It's his inheritance. It's meant to last. He might not have a future without treatment, I said. Good treatment. The kind that costs money. We'll figure out the costs, Richard said. Insurance will cover most of it. Most isn't all. There are copays, deductibles, medications. We can't afford it on my salary alone. You could pick up some extra work, Julia suggested. Just temporarily. I looked at her expensive handbag and her designer shoes and her complete lack of awareness. I could work myself to death while Connor sits on $300,000. Is that what you're suggesting? That's not fair, Connor said quietly. That money is supposed to be for us. For our future. For a house, for kids. So I should destroy my health so you can preserve your inheritance. It's not about the money. It's entirely about the money, Connor. You have resources. Your family has resources. But you'd rather I sacrifice everything than touch a dollar of it. You're being dramatic, Patricia said. Nobody's asking you to sacrifice everything. No? What would you call working 3 jobs? She looked confused. Nobody said anything about 3 jobs. And I realized my mistake. In this timeline, I hadn't picked up extra work yet. I hadn't even thought about it. I was talking about things that hadn't happened yet. I need some air, I said, and walked out of the apartment before anyone could stop me. I walked for a long time that evening. Through our neighborhood, past the lake, into areas I barely knew. Trying to clear my head. Trying to figure out what I was doing. I'd thought that catching the tumor early would change things. That maybe Connor would make different choices if we had more time. But I'd been wrong. He was making the same choices. His family was responding the same way. The only difference was that I knew what was coming. And I had a choice. Go through it all again, or walk away now. I thought about the studio apartment in northeast Minneapolis. The quiet mornings. The coffee that tasted better because I wasn't too exhausted to enjoy it. The piece of a life that was mine. Did I want to fight for this marriage? Did I want to try to change Connor's mind? To make him see that his choices were selfish? To convince him I was worth more than his inheritance? Or did I want to save myself before the damage was done? When I got back to the apartment, Connor's family was gone. He was sitting on the couch, looking exhausted and scared. We need to talk, he said. I know. About what you said. About the trust fund. I sat down next to him, leaving space between us. Okay. My parents think you're overreacting. That we can manage the costs without touching that money. What do you think? He was quiet for a long moment. I think I'm scared. I think I have cancer and I don't know what's going to happen. And that money is the only security I have. If I spend it all on treatment and the treatment doesn't work, what do I have left? You'd have me, I said. Would I? You walked out tonight. You've been acting strange for days. It feels like you're already halfway gone. He wasn't wrong. But I couldn't explain why. I couldn't tell him I'd already lived through this, that I knew how it ended, that I was trying to decide if it was worth fighting for something that had already failed once. I'm here, I said. But I need to know you see me, that you value me, that you understand I can't carry this alone. I don't want you to carry it alone. Then use the trust fund. Use the resources you have. Don't make me destroy myself to preserve money you might never get to spend. He looked at me for a long time. Then he said, I'll think about it. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't the immediate no I'd gotten the first time. Okay, I said. Think about it. The surgery happened 2 weeks later. Just like before. They removed most of the tumor but not all of it. Connor started radiation and chemotherapy. The side effects were brutal. Nausea, fatigue, hair loss. I'd seen it all before, but somehow it was harder this time. Because I knew it wasn't going to get easier. I knew what was coming. Connor still hadn't made a decision about the trust fund. Every time I brought it up, he'd say he was thinking about it. He needed to talk to his parents. He wanted to see how the treatment went first. Meanwhile, the bills were piling up. Thousands of dollars in copay. Medications that cost hundreds per dose. Parking fees at the hospital. 2 months into treatment, I was running out of patience. Connor, I said one evening. He was on the couch, pale and weak from that day's chemotherapy. We need to make a decision. We're going into debt. I'm going to have to pick up extra work if you don't use the trust fund. I know. So what are you going to do? He closed his eyes. Can we talk about this later? I don't feel good. We've been saying later for 2 months. Rachel, I have cancer. Can you give me a break? And that's when I knew. He was going to make the same choice he'd made before. He was going to protect his inheritance and let me drown. I'd thought that catching the tumor early would change things. That more time would mean different choices. But Connor was still Connor. His values hadn't changed. His priorities hadn't changed. The only thing that had changed was that I knew what was coming, and I had a choice about whether to live through it again. I made my decision that night. The next morning, I called Jennifer, the divorce lawyer I'd used in the other timeline. I made an appointment for the following week. I didn't tell Connor. I just started planning my exit. I found a studio apartment in northeast Minneapolis, not the same one, but similar. I put down a deposit. I started moving my important documents to a safe place. I opened my own bank account, separate from our joint account. Connor noticed something was different, but he didn't push. He was too sick, too focused on treatment. His family noticed too. Patricia called and asked if everything was okay. Connor says you've been distant, she said. I'm fine, I told her. Just dealing with a lot right now. We're all dealing with a lot. Connor needs your support. Connor needs a lot of things, including honesty from his family about the resources available to help him. She was quiet for a moment. That trust fund is his future, Rachel. We're trying to protect his future. Even if it destroys mine. Nobody's trying to destroy anything. You're being dramatic. I hung up. 3 months into Connor's treatment, I told him I wanted a divorce. We were in our bedroom. He was packing for a weekend at his parents' house. They'd offered to take care of him for a few days to give me a break. I was helping him fold clothes, and the words just came out. I can't do this anymore. He looked up. What? This marriage. I can't do it. Because of the trust fund. Because you chose money over me. Because your family watched me struggle and did nothing. Because when I needed you to show up, you protected your inheritance instead. Rachel, I have cancer. I know. And I'm sorry you're sick. I genuinely am. But you made a choice about how to handle it, and I'm making a choice about how to respond. I'm done. He stared at me. You're leaving me while I have cancer. I'm leaving you before I destroy myself trying to save you when you won't save yourself. This is insane. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Connor tried to convince me to stay. His family tried even harder. Richard called and told me I was being selfish. Patricia cried and said I was abandoning her son in his time of need. Mark sent a long email about the sanctity of marriage vows. Julia showed up at my door and told me I'd regret this for the rest of my life. I blocked all of them. The divorce took 4 months. Connor contested it this time, tried to argue that I was being unreasonable, that I wasn't giving him a fair chance. But the law didn't care about fairness. Minnesota was a no-fault state. I wanted out, and that was enough. When it was finalized, I felt the same way I'd felt the first time. Empty. Not sad. Not angry. Just done. I moved into the studio apartment. Started sleeping 8 hours a night. Started eating regular meals. The life I built looked almost identical to the one I'd built the first time. Small, quiet, mine. But this time, I was 3 years younger. This time, I'd left before the damage was done. This time, I still had my health, my energy, my sense of self. And this time, I had something else. The knowledge that I'd made the right choice. Not just once, but twice. 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Mark at a coffee shop downtown. He saw me first, hesitated like he was thinking about pretending he hadn't, then walked over. "Rachel," he said. "Mark. How are you?" "Good. You?" He nodded. "Good. Connor's doing okay. In case you were wondering. Treatment's going well." "I'm glad." He shifted his weight, uncomfortable. "Look, I know things ended badly, but I think you should know. Connor's using the trust fund now. For treatment. Our parents convinced him to." "Good for him. It would have been easier if you'd stayed. He needed support. He needed a lot of things. I couldn't be all of them." Mark looked at me for a long moment. "You seem different. Harder, maybe." "Not harder. Just clearer about what I'm worth." He nodded slowly, like he didn't quite understand but knew better than to argue. "Well, take care of yourself." "You too." After he left, I sat with my coffee and thought about the two versions of my life. The one where I'd stayed and worked 3 jobs and destroyed myself. The one where I'd left early and preserved myself. Both versions had the same ending for me. Alone, in a studio apartment, rebuilding from scratch. But this version felt different. Because I wasn't recovering from years of trauma. I was just starting fresh. And starting fresh at 32 was very different from starting fresh at 34. I had time, energy, options. I thought about what I wanted to do with that. What kind of life I wanted to build. I started taking night classes at a community college. Not for a degree, just for fun. Art history, creative writing, basic web design. Things I'd always been curious about but never had time for. I made new friends. People who knew me as Rachel the single woman, not Rachel the devoted wife. People who didn't know my history, didn't have opinions about my divorce, just liked me for who I was now. I dated a little. Nothing serious. A few coffee dates, a couple of dinners. It was strange at first, learning to be single again, but also freeing. One of my dates was with a guy named David. He was an architect, funny and kind, with an easy laugh and a genuine interest in listening. We went out 3 times before he told me he'd just gotten out of a long-term relationship and wasn't ready for anything serious. "I like you," he said. "But I'm still figuring out who I am outside of that relationship. It wouldn't be fair to you." I appreciated his honesty. I get it. I'm kind of doing the same thing. We stayed friends. He introduced me to his friend group, other creative professionals in their 30s, most of them single, all of them trying to figure out life. We'd meet for drinks or dinners, go to art shows or concerts, have lazy Sunday brunches where we talked about everything and nothing. It was the kind of social life I'd never had time for when I was married. The kind of life that felt like mine. One evening, about a year after my divorce, I was at a gallery opening with David and his friends. We were looking at abstract paintings and drinking cheap wine and debating whether a canvas that was just 3 blue stripes could really be considered art. David's friend Lauren, a graphic designer I'd become friendly with, nudged me and said, "You seem happy." "I am," I said. And I meant it. "Good. You deserve it." I thought about that later, walking home through the quiet streets of Northeast Minneapolis. About happiness. About deserving it. About the 2 versions of my life and the choice I'd made. I didn't know what had happened, whether I'd actually gone back in time or just had the most vivid, persistent dream in human history. I didn't know if Connor had survived his cancer, if he'd used the trust fund, if he'd learned anything from our marriage. I didn't know. And I realized I didn't care. Because I'd made the choice that was right for me. Not the choice that made me look noble or self-sacrificing. Not the choice that prioritized someone else's future over my own well-being. Just the choice that let me keep my life. And that was enough. 2 years after the divorce, I was living a life that felt completely mine. I'd gotten promoted at the law firm, not dramatically, but enough that I had more responsibility and better pay. I'd moved into a one-bedroom apartment with actual closet space. I'd started running on weekends, something I'd never had time or energy for before. I'd even started seeing someone. His name was Alex, and he was a teacher at a public middle school. We'd met through Lauren, who'd taught with him years ago. He was patient and thoughtful, the kind of person who remembered details from previous conversations and asked genuine questions about your life. We'd been dating for 6 months, taking things slow, and I liked him. More than that, I trusted him. He showed up when he said he would. He was honest about his feelings. He treated my time as valuable. My sister's getting married next month, he mentioned one evening. We were making dinner together in my apartment, something we did twice a week. Would you want to come? As my date. Meeting his family. That was a step. A significant one. I'd like that, I said. He smiled. Good. Fair warning. They're going to love you and ask a lot of invasive questions. I can handle invasive questions. You sure? My mom once asked my last girlfriend about her ovulation schedule at Thanksgiving dinner. I laughed. Okay, that's aggressive. But I'll manage. Later that evening, after Alex left, I sat on my couch and thought about how different this felt from my marriage to Connor. With Connor, I'd always felt like I was trying to prove I was worth keeping. Like I had to earn my place in his life through service and sacrifice. With Alex, I just felt like myself. And that was enough. I thought about the version of me who'd worked 3 jobs. Who'd collapsed from exhaustion. Who'd discovered the trust fund only after destroying her health trying to save Connor. I hope she was okay now, wherever she was. I hope she'd rebuilt something good. I hope she'd learned the same lesson I had. That you can't pour from an empty cup. That saving yourself isn't selfish. That sometimes walking away is the bravest thing you can do. 3 years after the divorce, 6 years after the original diagnosis that might never have happened or might have happened in another timeline, I was at a coffee shop in downtown Minneapolis when I saw Patricia, Connor's mother. She was with a friend, both of them dressed in expensive casual clothes, the kind of women who did charity galas and country club luncheons. She saw me at the same time. For a moment, we just looked at each other. Then she excused herself from her friend and walked over to my table. Rachel, she said. Patricia. May I sit? I gestured to the empty chair. She sat down, carefully, like she was afraid I might change my mind. You look well, she said. Thank you. How's Connor? His good. In remission, actually. The treatment worked. I'm glad. She studied me. Are you? Glad. Yes. I never wished him harm. I just couldn't be the person who sacrificed everything to save him when he wouldn't help himself. She flinched slightly. We were trying to protect his future. I know. But in doing so, you asked me to give up mine. We didn't ask you to work 3 jobs. Yes, you did. When you had resources and chose not to use them, when you watched me struggle and did nothing, you made a choice. I just made a different one. Patricia was quiet for a long moment. He still talks about you sometimes. Connor. He says you were right. That he should have used the trust fund from the beginning. That he made a mistake. I hope he learned from it. Did you ever, she hesitated. Did you ever regret leaving? I thought about that honestly. About the 2 versions of my life. The one where I'd stayed and the one where I'd left. Both had been hard. Both had involved loss and rebuilding and learning to live with choices. But one had left me broken. The other had left me whole. No, I said. I didn't regret it. She nodded slowly. I probably owe you an apology. For how we handled things. For not seeing what we were asking of you. Probably, I agreed. Would it make a difference if I gave you one? Not really. But I appreciate the acknowledgement. She smiled faintly. You're different. Stronger, maybe. Not stronger. Just clearer about what I will and won't accept. Patricia stood up. Take care of yourself, Rachel. You too. After she left, I sat with my coffee and thought about forgiveness. About whether I forgave Connor for his choices, his family for their complicity, whether forgiveness even mattered. I decided it didn't. Not because I was holding on to anger, but because forgiveness implied they'd had power over me. And they didn't. Not anymore. I'd built a life without them. I'd found happiness without them. Whatever regrets or apologies they carried were theirs to handle. I didn't need them to be okay. That evening, I went to Alex's apartment for dinner. His sister's wedding had been last month, a beautiful outdoor ceremony where his mother had, true to warning, asked me detailed questions about my life plans. I'd handled it gracefully, made them laugh, and apparently passed whatever test I'd been taking. My mom called today, Alex said as we were cleaning up after dinner. She wanted me to invite you to family dinner next Sunday. Should I be nervous? Only if you're afraid of my dad's homemade pierogi and my niece asking you to play Frozen for the 10th time. I think I can handle that. He smiled and pulled me into a hug. You sure you're ready for the full family experience? I thought about it. About what it meant to be part of someone's life, to let them be part of yours. About the difference between sacrificing yourself and just showing up. Yeah, I said. I'm ready. And I was. 4 years after the divorce, I was 36 years old. I had a job I was good at, an apartment I liked, friends who knew and valued me. I had a relationship with someone who showed up consistently, who respected my boundaries, who didn't expect me to set myself on fire to keep him warm. I had a life that felt sustainable. Not perfect. Not exciting in any movie-plot kind of way. Just good. Solid. Mine. Sometimes I still thought about the other timeline. The one where I'd stayed, where I'd worked 3 jobs, where I'd discovered the truth too late. I wondered if that version of me was okay now. If she'd rebuilt. If she'd found peace. I hoped she had. And sometimes I thought about what I'd learned from living the same situation twice. About the patterns we fall into, the choices we make, the ways we convince ourselves that sacrifice equals love. I'd learned that you can love someone and still leave them. That you can have compassion for someone's suffering without taking on the burden of fixing it. That sometimes the kindest thing you can do, for yourself and for them, is to walk away. I'd learned that your worth isn't measured by how much you're willing to sacrifice. That boundaries aren't selfish. That choosing yourself doesn't make you a bad person. I'd learned that life gives you choices, and sometimes the same choice multiple times, until you finally make the one that saves you. And I'd learned that saving yourself isn't a one-time decision. It's a practice. A daily choosing of your own well-being over other people's comfort. A constant reaffirmation that you matter, that your life has value, that you deserve to be more than someone else's supporting character. It wasn't always easy. There were still hard days. Days when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I'd made the right choice, when I felt guilty for prioritizing my own well-being. But those days were fewer now. And when they came, I reminded myself, I'd lived both versions. I knew what happened when I stayed, when I sacrificed everything, when I believed someone else's future was more important than my present. I knew how that story ended. And I'd chosen to write a different one. One evening, sitting on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the Minneapolis skyline, Alex asked me something. Do you ever regret not having kids? It was a fair question. I was 36. If I wanted children, the window was closing. Sometimes, I said honestly, but I think I regret the life I didn't get to live more than the children I didn't have. What do you mean? I spent my early 30s taking care of someone who didn't take care of me. If I'd stayed in that marriage, if I'd had kids with him, I'd have spent my whole life like that. Taking care of everyone else. Never having time or energy for myself. And now I have a life that's mine. It's not the life I thought I'd have when I was 25. But it's a good life. Maybe even better than the one I'd imagined. He nodded thoughtfully. For what it's worth, I think you made the right choice. Yeah, I said. I think I did too. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn orange and pink and purple. And I thought about all the versions of myself I'd been. The devoted wife, the exhausted caretaker, the woman who'd chosen herself, the one who was still learning what that choice meant. I thought about Connor, who'd survived his cancer with the help of the trust fund he'd finally agreed to use. About his family, who'd learned too late that love isn't just about protecting someone's future, it's about supporting them in the present. About all the people who'd been part of my story and were now just distant memories. And I thought about the life I was living now. Small, quiet, sustainably happy. Not a fairy tale. Not a revenge story. Not a dramatic transformation. Just a real life, built one choice at a time, by a woman who'd learned the hard way that you can't save someone who won't save themselves. But you can save yourself. You can walk away. You can start over. You can build something new. And you can choose yourself. Again and again and again. That's what I did. And it made all the difference.